So, Dilys, how many people have you helped, or how many CVs have you written in your time?
I've written a few, but I've helped people write thousands. I'm much better at thousands and thousands over the last 20 years, much better at editing. So when people come to me and they've actually got the bones of a CV, or they've got something, a CV that they really want to get right for a particular job application, they really, really want the interview, then I help with that. Yeah, thousands.
So what, thousands, great. So what are the common mistakes in CV writing?
The biggest mistake for me is that people write a CV based on their experience and they don't understand the purpose of the CV. So CV is a marketing document. It's to get you a meeting. So it might be a networking meeting. More commonly, it's an interview, a job interview. So if they're not thinking about it as a job interview, it literally is a recording of what they've done, and it may not have information in it that's relevant to the reader. So considering the reader, so what is it the reader wants to know about you? And the reader usually, if it's for a job interview, wants to know that you've got the right skills, the right experience, the right knowledge, the right qualifications for their job vacancy. So people coming along where it's just a recording of what they've done rather than it emphasising certain things. So that would be a big mistake for me.
So what you're saying is your CV shouldn't just be kind of, you shouldn't just have one CV. You should tailor it to each individual job application.
Absolutely. I've got a really interesting example for you. A while ago, I had a young man along who was, it was the beginning of the recession, and he worked in financial services and was about to be made, his role was about to be made redundant, and he was in a real panic about getting a job. And so he got his CV and applied for a couple of jobs, no interviews, a couple more jobs. So every day he was applying for more and more jobs, and he was applying for jobs that he knew he could do, but the reader would have no idea he could do. He's looking at financial services here, and then he starts to broaden the range of the things that he can apply for. By the time I met him, he had applied for 500 jobs and not had one single response. And after some time with me, he got 2 interviews with recruitment consultants who both put him forward to the companies that they were helping source applicants for, and he was offered 2 jobs. And that was the difference to tailoring a CV to the needs of the reader and really focusing in on that job description. And it made that difference, 500 to 500 nothings, and then 2 interviews and 2 job offers in a recession.
That's amazing. I mean, what I've seen with CVs, one of the issues that I've always had is I don't spend a long time reading them because you get so many, and I think people sort of try and kind of treat it almost like a story that's got a great ending, but it starts off slow, and I think that's not the way.
Yeah.
To, for me, that it's got to hit you hard, even in the first kind of few lines. That's got to really grab your attention. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. A lot of people don't even get onto the second page to make their minds up that they will interview somebody. So that first page, put your contact details at the top of it. I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you've got to make the reader scroll up, scroll down, start looking all over the place for how do I phone this person, how do I email this person, you're making life really complicated. So that's the first thing they should see, your name and how to get back in touch with you. And then a really punchy profile. So the profile saying something about how they're relevant to the job. So sticking a job title in it, and only 2 or 3 sentences, but make it really, really appealing, really interesting to the reader. And then the next thing they're going to see are either technical skills or specialist skills that are needed that follow the job description, and then career history. So where they work right now, and so that may be where the reader thinks, okay, that's enough for me, I'm going to interview this person, and may not get onto that second page.
Sure, no, I absolutely understand that. And what about, I mean, employment law has changed. You can't be biased against age or gender, but do you think people should put their ages on a CV? No,
there are a lot of things that you don't have to put on a CV, and employers are not allowed to ask. So age, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, disability, race and religion. So you don't have to mention any of those things, they're not allowed to ask. And it does mean that if you don't add those things, that employers actually are just looking at the skills and the experience that you've got and the qualifications. So they're looking at the person matching the job description. Which is another reason why we don't encourage, or it's not kind of common practice for people to put their photographs on CVs in the UK. That it happens in a lot of European countries. In the States they put photographs on, but we're instantly able to judge age, we're able to judge gender, we're able to judge a number of things, and it's much nicer for people just to be judged on whether they're right for the job or not.
But what about if you're fantastically good looking?
Well, what is it you're applying for? And if your photograph is relevant, then yes. And if you're going to be, I don't know, a dancer on a TV show or something, yes, your appearance is going to be important. And I'm sure you'd be asked to send headshots and long shots, but to be technical support in an IT company, I think maybe not.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was slightly joking in that question, but it's a very good point, you know, because I always wondered whether it's a good idea to put on a photograph or not. And I think it does sort of change the dynamic, really, because people do judge on appearance, and even on particular photographs, you could be judged just on the expression or the quality of the photograph. It is a strange area, isn't it? Definitely.
And I wouldn't advise people put a photograph on, because if you're only going to take 2 pages to write a CV, every line of that 2 pages is important and precious space. So taking a big chunk of it up with a photograph is just literally a waste of space. There are things you want to tell the reader about your experience and about the skills that you've got, which are much more important than a photograph.
So how long should a CV be? I mean, I've read quite a few CVs that could be 3 or 4 pages, which seems crazy to me. It even puts you off reading it. But what is the ideal length?
No more than 2 pages. A 3 and 4 page CV to me shows lack of discipline. That if you're showing the skills and experience you've got that are relevant to the job description, and you're talking about your most recent experience, then it shouldn't be any more than 2 pages. So I advise people not to go back any further than 10 to 15 years if you're an old person like me. Don't talk about ancient history, it's irrelevant. You want to talk about what's happened most recently. And not repeating yourself, so making sure that every line in the CV gives information which mirrors the job description and is going to be interesting to the reader. It's about your skills, about your experience that are relevant to what they're looking for. The minute you start to repeat yourself, you lose the reader's attention. They're going to think, oh, I've read that before, I'll just skim through the rest, or I'll just put that aside in the OK pile, rather than, wow, this is really fascinating, I can't wait to read the next page. So make sure that every line is attention grabbing. And as you said earlier, that going on to the second page, you don't want the great big story at the end, the real wow factor at the end. It's got to be on that front page, because people don't sometimes get to the second page before they make a decision. And so what goes on the second page is training and technical skills, perhaps. And what else? Courses, professional memberships, and possibly interests and hobbies. But I wouldn't go to town on that at all. And definitely not references. Your references should only be given to the employer once you've accepted a job offer. So don't waste space writing down contact details of your referees.
Talking of interest, I mean, I've read on CVs literally hundreds of times interests such as cinema, socialising with friends. I mean, what do you make of that? I kind of get a bit bored with seeing sort of what seems to be quite boring interests.
The interests themselves can be interesting. It's how you put it across. So going to the cinema doesn't sound very interesting. I would recommend not actually saying that, but if you're interested in a particular genre of film, you're particularly knowledgeable about film, I would say that. I would talk about the genre, I would talk about your interest in it. So rather than putting going to the cinema, those 3 words, I would make 5 words and say something saying cinema especially, or this genre in particular. Socialising with friends just sounds like you go out and get drunk all the time, so I would leave that off, definitely.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the other thing, and maybe this is more geared towards sort of younger people or people without so much work experience. I've read a lot of CVs where people are kind of really bigging up their roles, almost to the point that it's kind of a bit sort of laughable, that they would, in charge of catering and facilitating liquid beverages to senior staff, and effectively, you're making the tea. But what would you know? Should CVs be in plain speak and honest, or should you try and embellish things a little bit?
I think you should be the best you can be. I think embellishing, you want to be confident. You want to sound confident about what you do. Exaggeration, slight exaggeration is okay. Downright untruths is not okay. You'll be found out. It's just not worth it. I've spent time with people going through their CVs when they've wanted a particular job and they really have embellished, and they're going to be found out in the interview. There's no point. So they might sound fantastic on paper, and face to face they're not going to match that. So it's got to be a good representation of what you do and what your capabilities are.
Sure. So, and what about CV no-nos? What should you absolutely not do?
Well, lie. Put qualifications on that you don't have. Put job titles on that you've never had. So a CV has got to be honest. It's got to be truthful, and it's got to be interesting. So any more no-nos I can think of? Yeah, listing tons and tons of hobbies. I'd put 3 maximum in, and be prepared to talk about them. Yes, as we said, they've got to be interesting, or you've got to be passionate about it. I mean,
I work in the creative industry, so I get a lot of CVs that are sort of works of art in terms of graphic design and in terms of layout, and you used to get kind of CVs sort of sent through, posted rather than emailed, just to kind of show off this very beautiful paper. I mean, what do you make it? Should you play it straight, or are some of these kind of gimmicks good to get noticed?
If that's the world that you're going to be in, then yes, do those things that you're saying are gimmicks, but actually would be a bit like a portfolio. So if you're wanting a job as a graphic designer, make sure that your CV is a really beautiful design. I've spoken to people who are picture editors, and they do magazine layouts and things, for example, print layout, and they've had a really boring CV on 2 pages of white, and I've just said, turn it into a magazine, make it really interesting, because it's then a portfolio and a CV. So it can work. If you're going into, be a runner or something, then some extraordinary CV that is on coloured paper and embossed and all that kind of thing is just going to be completely over the top.
Sure. I mean, there seems to be a kind of a fashion at the moment. I don't know if it's because it's taught in some college, but it does seem to be happening more and more, where people kind of put down their skills and then they grade themselves. So it will be, word processing 7 out of 10, computer skills 6 out of 10. I mean, what do you make of that? It seems that it's only been around. I've only seen it in the last kind of couple of years. But is that a good idea?
I think it's not a bad idea. I must admit that I haven't seen it. You probably see CVs of younger people much more than I do. So I've seen people put down things like languages, where they would have, fluent, intermediate, basic, conversational, which is good. So if you're going to put down 5 languages, don't mislead your employer to be thinking that you're fluent in all of them. So I would think the same goes for things like technical skills. Yeah, not a bad idea.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably quite a good idea as well. I mean, certainly when they're talking about pieces, software, for example, like Avid or Adobe or Photoshop, and they've graded themselves. It does give you an idea of where they're at, and it also kind of feels quite honest as well. So I quite liked it. But
yes, I like that. That sounds good to me. Oh, another thing about CVs. Can I just mention this? We talked about going back onto the second page of a CV. So what is it you write in the content? What are you actually telling somebody about your work experience? And I would make sure that you put achievements in. So you talk about your overall responsibility, and then mention some things that you're really proud of, that are relevant to the job description, so that you're giving the reader an opportunity to ask about those things that you would want to talk about in an interview. So you go along to interview and they go, okay, this sounds really interesting, tell me about these achievements, and you've got some really good stories to tell.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, sometimes, for me, when I've interviewed people, sometimes having another look at a CV kind of just before they come in, and you're kind of looking for an icebreaker or something to talk about just to kind of relax someone into the interview. So I can see it's always good to have like an icebreaker conversation point on a CV.
And that's going to differentiate you from other people. So if there are 20 people applying for a job, that you might all have got similar job titles and worked in companies for a similar length of time and done reasonably similar things, but it's the achievements that are going to differentiate you from your competition.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much, and I might go and rewrite my CV.
If you need any help, let me know.
No, will do.